because that's what children do that all the time, right? Like they'll do something like, I think if it's him, nobody will know.
Yeah.
Right?
So
Like,
they know that these two stepsisters are practicing a deception.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
welcome to Classical Etc. I'm Paul Schaefer, and I am here with a trio of guests. I'm here with Ian Galloway, who's been on the podcast before, Lee Lowe, who I don't know if you've been on Classical Etc. You have been. Okay, so she's back. Also, Novel Thoughts. That's the podcast you two were doing. I don't know if that show's still ongoing or not.
We'll see.
We're just,
We'll see.
Life brings us mysteries, and then we find out as life goes on whether those things continue to happen or not. And our very special guest, Dr. Vigan Goroyan. Now,
Good morning.
Dr. Goroyan, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm just trucking here. I've got a script here, Vigan.
I'm trying to confuse you.
Now, Vigan was the professor of religious studies and Orthodox Christianity at the University of Virginia. Now he's a professor at Memoria College. Martin's not here, but I have to say memoriacollege.org. And Vigan is also the senior fellow at the Center for Law and Religion at Emory University. Not to mention, he's also written several books, Incarnate Love, Tending the Heart of Virtue, Rallying the Really Human Things, and other books that I don't have listed here. But one of my favorite books from you is about gardening. And so you can find anything from theology, ethics, gardening, children's literature from Vigan.
You don't remember the title?
No, I don't.
You don't have any luck here because I forgot it as well.
Well, I guess that's our listeners can go find that out. Or if we're really good, we'll put it in the show notes.
It was written too long ago. I don't remember that much.
Well, at least, hopefully you remember about fairy tales because that's what we're talking about today.
I live in a fairy tale, I think.
Okay, well, we're going to get there. But before we get there, we always start with what we're reading. So, Vigan, I'm going to give you a second to think about that.
All right.
And Ian, what are you reading?
Yeah, I'm reading a couple different books. I'm about to start reading The Wind in the Willows again for our book club, which I can't wait because I love The Wind in the Willows. Also reading, it's a new kind of modern speculative fiction. It's actually really autobiographical, called Everything Sad is Untrue. It's very interesting. I'll let you guys explore that title. And then also a Marilyn Robinson Housekeeping that I just kind of pick up periodically. Very Marilyn Robinson is
like the
soul
name
stirring.
of the book is Housekeeping.
Housekeeping.
Okay. Wow, that's a lot.
I barely ever read these days. So it's like I pick it
You're
up.
in that stage
I
of
pick it
life.
up and then I just say I'm reading it. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Lee, what are you reading?
I'm reading a lot of cookbooks these days in anticipation of the holidays. That's my favorite bedtime reading these days.
Yeah.
And I also am getting ready to pick up Wind in the Willows
Yep.
again. I am
Yep.
always honored to go and do a little lecture series at school with that. So that's exciting. And I just picked up Understanding the Hillbilly Thomist about Flannery O'Connor. So
Ooh,
Yeah.
I know some people that could probably benefit from that. We've had recent conversations in the schools division where people are like, I just don't get her. I don't like her. And I'm like, oh, you're missing it. You're missing it. There's so much good there. Vigan, what are you reading?
What I'm reading, I don't remember the titles of.
Okay.
I never remember the titles of the books. This is true.
Mm-hmm.
It's bad when you get to footnoting, but I'm reading a book of selections from well, I forgot that one already. I'm reading a book on James Madison. That's my bedtime reading. Yeah. I'm reading a book on beauty. I don't remember the title of it. It's a big, thick book on beauty.
Is that, hold on,
Bishop Barron's press there.
I think the author's name is not McIntyre, but it's
Something close to that,
it's something
yes.
close to that.
Yes.
I have it on my desk, Beauty and Imitation.
Yes,
That's the title of it.
yes. I'm reading that. I'm reading a newly issued book of collection of essays on orthodoxy and classical schooling that just came out.
I think I saw that in your hands. I think
Yes,
that
you
was
did
called
see it in my
Classical
hands.
Education
Into
and
the
Orthodox
Light.
Christianity.
Edited by David Hicks, yeah. That's enough, isn't it?
That's plenty. That's plenty. I'm still reading what I talked about on the last show, which is 20 Years Later, which is a sequel to The Three Musketeers. And I'm very much enjoying that.
Can I add one more?
Sure.
I accidentally said speculative fiction when I was talking about Everything Sad is Untrue. That's not. It's autobiographical. It's because I was thinking of the Canticle of Leibowitz.
Oh, the Canticle for Leibowitz.
Oh,
Leibowitz.
Yeah.
That was the speculative fiction that I was thinking of. I wanted to correct that because people might have said speculative fiction.
Yeah. How are you liking that?
Yeah. It's I like it. It's interesting. I don't know. I would like to finish it because I don't mind it at all. Like it's one of those books that I'm enjoying as I go.
Yeah.
There are times and seasons throughout that book. I call it seasons because it's very. I mean, you're going through thousands of years of history throughout it. It's very interesting.
Yeah. Lee, have you read that?
No, I haven't. It's on my bookshelf.
Oh,
though.
because Cheryl loved it. And we talked about it recently, I think, on a show. And I enjoyed it, but I really don't know what to think about it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm there.
And so
I'm very close to being done.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Well, before we get to
Well, I've been told to read it for the last 40 years, but I haven't gotten to it yet. So that's the truth, actually. The name keeps coming up,
Yes.
and I feel guilty now every time I hear this.
well, maybe it's a sign. And
There are lots of signs in the world.
the next time you come, maybe we'll ask you about it, and you won't have remembered the name of it. And
I will have forgotten because I'm reading it.
right. So before we get to fairy tales, we do have a listener question. This is something that we try to do on most shows. And this listener question that, by the way, for our listeners, Jessica prepared all of this for me. This is not my doing. This is all her. That's why I have a script here. So Jessica had prepared this email from Brent, which is a very simple question. What book have you started and never finished, and why? I'm going to start because
go.
when I saw this question, I thought, you know what? For me, it's Little Women. I'm so glad Lee's here to gasp in surprise. But I think when I was a child, it was, I was in the house. I had two sisters, and just never anything that appealed to me. I tried as an adult, couldn't get through it. It's just it's not engaging to me at all. And I can power through some non-engaging stuff, but that I was reading the the Sterling book, and it's this thick. It's literally a couple of inches thick, and that just discouraged me. I was like, I can't do it. I got a little bit in, and I was like, this is just not getting me. So anyway, that's mine.
I don't have an exact novel, but I have a genre that I started reading and then realized I just hated it and stopped. And so it was this kind of modern, what they call grim dark fantasy, where everything is just kind of the anti-Tolkien. It's trying to be kind of utterly real and really...
That sounds awful.
It is. It is. There's a lot of people that love it. And I gave it a try and then realized my soul was being crushed by it. And I just didn't like that experience. So I gave it up.
Yeah.
Really?
I think that's going to lead us into what we're talking here about fairy tales. That's great.
Probably so.
Lee?
When I heard that question, I thought instead of a genre, I think it's an entire time period. I think my 30s. I think I didn't finish a book in my 30s. Just in the young children years, and I'm
you
also
pick up and you set aside.
And then you fall asleep. That's why cookbooks are so great at night because it's easy to get through a recipe. But I'm also guilty of skipping around. So I'll start a book, I'll go halfway through, then I'll read the back, and then I'll go back in the middle. So there are many books
You're
that
not
I
unique.
have. So there are many books that there are chunks in the middle somewhere that I haven't completed.
Yeah. Well, I have a cousin who she will, when she starts a book, she will read the last chapter because she wants to know whether she likes how it ends, and then she will go read it again.
No.
Don't do that. I'm not that extreme, but
Life is not that way. Fortunately.
I agree. I couldn't believe it when I heard it, but it is her practice. Vegan, do you have a book that you...
Well, every book that I've started and hadn't been able to finish, I've forgotten the titles because I started the books. But there is one I'll name, Middlemarch.
And
I've tried
really?
starting on that about 3 times.
Okay.
And I know I have to read it.
Yeah.
But I haven't read it.
just not engaging, or
Yeah, somehow or other, I just, I should have been more patient the last 3 times I tried to read it, but it's still there waiting for me.
Yeah. Well, and it's a lesson for us all, right? Like
Yes.
there's all these books that we know that they're worth reading, and sometimes it's just they're bitter pills to swallow.
Yeah.
But other
can be a
people
slog.
love them.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, let's get into our discussion, which is on fairy tales. And my script says fairy tales might be dismissed as simple children's stories. I've never done that. I'm just letting you know that. But for those that read them deeply, there's a whole lot in them. And so today we're going to ask, why are they important? What wisdom is in them? And how do we approach them? So, Vegan, you get these questions as you've been a huge proponent of fairy tales in your life. So, first, I'm not going to ask, are they important? I know your answer on that one, but why are they important?
Because in my view, they are the most concrete of stories. They do not come any near to abstraction. They're hard to abstract. And it requires you to actually read the narrative. And what was the question again?
Why are they important? And what? And well, I didn't say this, but what is it about the fairy tales that make them important? I think you've kind of already answered that one.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of lessons to life that they answer directly in concrete ways through character and action and narrative. And that's why children in particular are attracted to them, because children have not learned yet how to abstract things, fortunately.
Is there something about the fairy tale generally has, now I know you'll correct me if I'm wrong on this, some fantastical element, right? You've got the wolf that's playing the part of the grandmother, or you've got the the beast that is enchanted. Is that a necessary element, or is that something that just happens to catch the children's imagination more and gets them to, because children do live in a fairy tale world more than we do, right? And so I've always been curious. We say fairy tale, right? Because generally they have fairies or something in them. But is that an essential part of the children's stories that we are
talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. There's magic in them in some sense, but that is just an analog of grace. So children are introduced to grace, among other things, through fairy tales. It's the magic. That's one thing. And so, yes, the way Tolkien speaks of subcreations, we all, at times, would like to enter one of these subcreations. And in some cases, we're gifted enough to create them for ourselves. But that's fairy. And it's a part of human nature, but it's a part of human nature that I think adulthood adulterates. Children in particular have the capacity, maybe because they haven't lived that long, to actually engage subcreations as real, completely real. That's related to play, and why children can play in such a way that they virtually dwell in this subcreation or fairyland and can assume masks of character too within the story that they're actually spinning out for themselves when they play creatively.
And you do see when you try to call a child back from one of those worlds, like
it's almost impossible.
It takes time, right?
Yeah.
It's not like they can snap right back into it.
No, they don't want you to interfere.
Yeah.
I've thought about this. I think somehow or other they've observed enough of adult life to know that adult life spoils that, and so keep away.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think so. I even remember myself being in that position, dwelling in another world and having adults too near for comfort, kind of. Go away.
Well, and you see that sort of in the way, right? The Chronicles of Narnia is set up, right? They got to go into a wardrobe. They got to
Yes,
get
that's right.
into their hidden spot away from the adults. Who are the great fairy tale writers?
Well, I don't know that I can name them all because, in a point of fact, there are fairy tales that I'm not acquainted with due to language barriers in some instances. So,
Because
I grew up with Armenian fairy tales, but were there great writers of fairy tales? First of all, what is the origin of a fairy tale? And Kenneth Grahame, in an essay that he wrote, you know who Kenneth Grahame is, the author of Wind in the Willows, but not just the author of Wind in the Willows. I think he was at heart a poet, actually, and Wind in the Willows is poetry. At moments, it's not. It is poetry. He just has a sense, sound, for example, alliteration. It appears in Wind in the Willows. He can't help himself. He does it because he's writing poetry in the end. So what was the question again?
Well, we were talking about who the great authors were, and
well, he's one, but he didn't write that much in the way of fairy tales. He wrote several others in addition to Wind in the Willows. Why am I going blank on the one I love so much about the dragon? It's not. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
The Reluctant Dragon.
The Reluctant Dragon. I've always been entertained by The Reluctant Dragon. It's just marvelous, because it takes me back to my boyhood. Really, I think, in a way, I could imagine being with that dragon and making friends and all the rest of it. And so Grahame, but of course, the Grimms are high on the list, and Hans Christian Andersen certainly is high on the list. There was I went to a World Council of Churches while I was in a conference, the World Council of Churches. We were in South Africa at the time, and there were about 15, 16 theologians from around the world. And there was one lady there, and I wish I remember her name. She was such a sweet, brilliant woman from Denmark. And of course, I'd been appointed as the master of ceremonies for a talent show populated by theologians. And she came up to me and she said, "Vigen, what am I going to do? I don't know what to do." So I thought a minute and I said, "Well, do you know any stories by Hans Christian Andersen?" And she sort of leapt and ran to her room and brought back a volume of Hans Christian Andersen and told me, "The genius is with me wherever I go."
Wow.
Isn't that extraordinary?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
So she had something to do.
Yeah. Well, my next question was going to be, right, like, is this only, do fairy tales play like an important role for children, and what's the role for adults? And I think that just answered that question. Like, this is something that, in some ways, you're talking about the children not wanting adults to interfere in their imaginative world, but in some ways, this, as adults reading those fairy tales, brings us back to the
pristine world of fairy,
where we really are living in a world of grace and a world of the supernatural.
Yeah. There's one name I forgot, which is so important, George MacDonald.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
See, he invented modern fairy or modern fantasy literature, but he also wrote about it, not addressing it directly, but in his sermons, his unspoken sermons. If you read through them, you see experience a mind who just dwelled in that reality and related it to Scripture and Christianity in a way that I think theology has not acknowledged him as a great theologian, and he was actually a great theologian. But he wrote wonderful stories too, which If more theologians worked at writing fairy tales, they might actually be better theologians.
That's probably fair.
For example, when I was maturing, everyone talked about demythologizing Scripture.
Yes.
Well, that's a big mistake. You lose Scripture by trying to demythologize it in the same manner as you lose the fairy tales if you try to demythologize them.
Mm-hmm.
Because fairy tales have a relationship to Holy Scripture, not just ours, Judeo-Christian, but around the world in a way. The Grimms thought that fairy tales were remnants of ancient religious poetry, not necessarily Christian. And it explains how they wrote the fairy tales that they did, which obviously were not. They collected fairy tales, but they innovated in the sense that they brought those fairy tales together, found similar fairy tales that were similar, and drew out of them what they thought would be a story, a great fairy story. So the Grimms are not translating verbatim from what stories they heard mostly orally, but rather they're a creative mind behind it. So they were making a sub-creation, and that was their obligation, they thought, to retaining the wisdom of the past, which were in these stories that they gathered.
Were they intentionally trying to do it in a Christian way?
Clearly.
Okay.
The problem is that in some of the translations of the Grimms, the religious language is expunged. Well, it's retranslated. So, I'm working on Snow White right now. The dwarves almost, in my view, are monastics. And the prince comes to visit them I think comes there because it's almost a holy place. But what was I going to say now? I forgot. I lost my train of thought.
The Grimms, I was asking if they had done this in a particular Christian way, because you said
yes, they did. Okay, so there's a good example in Snow White of the traditions they drew from. And Father Ronald Murphy wrote probably the best book on the Grimms there is as far as the fairy tales are concerned and the interpretation of them. So the name of that book, title of that book is The Owl, the Raven, and the Dove, where he's acknowledging the three great traditions from which the Grimms drew. The owl being classical myth and classical world, the raven being the Germanic world, and and the dove being Christianity. And at the end of Snow White, there are three animals in particular that are pointed to that are sort of sentinels, actually, in effect, mourning Snow White. They in the casket on the mountain, and there is an owl, a raven, and a dove mentioned, in particular as the birds that stood by the coffin. So that's a signal right there. But as far as the story itself is concerned, she's taken away by the prince to his father's castle. And the way that we're drawn into that and follow the narrative, in some sense, that's an allegory of Christ and the church, or the individual Christian with God and the marriage of the two. That's what they're up to there.
So what I'm hearing you say with regards to how we read a fairy story is that, and maybe we need to make a distinction between how adults and how children read fairy stories. But as adults, we're really looking for signs and symbols,
mm-hmm.
and that we understand kind of the deeper moral implication that this story is passing on to us. But if we're reading a fairy story with a child, what's the best way to go about that?
Read the fairy story to the child and don't comment.
Mm.
That's the best advice.
Mm.
You're not trusting that they are human beings. If they are human beings, then I believe that the Lord has given us sacramentalize. It's sin that blurs the vision. So they will understand in one way or another, not in a way that is abstraction or conceptualization, the meaning in the characters and the actions and the narrative of these stories. And in the long run, they will carry that in their memory, and that will enable them to be aware adults.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that you would know the Chesterton, because didn't Chesterton say something about like he was prepared for the faith through the stories he read as a child?
Yeah.
No,
I mean, I don't.
There is some of that in Chesterton. Yeah, well, he says that the stories he remembers best are the fairy tales.
He talks about MacDonald, doesn't he?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about MacDonald too. But he does talk in those terms, that the fairy tales were the truest stories he ever read, then and now.
Mm-hmm. And so that reading those stories as a child really kind of prepared his soul and his mind to accept
Christianity.
the totality of Christianity. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, Lewis talks about that too.
Yeah,
He
just
learns that from MacDonald.
from a practical, I mean, I have a 7-year-old daughter, and we've been reading through Narnia and others. And the way she makes connections when I shut up is pretty
It's
astounding.
revealing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I had a similar experience when I was reading I think it was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It was one of the Chronicles of Narnia to one of our foster daughters,
Mhm.
and she was so irate one night. And I was like, we always read a chapter of the book. I'm going to read it. And she was just sitting there pouting. And it was, the Queen was in it. And I just remember her just making snide remarks the whole time. and like, but she was applying what was going on in the story to her life.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next night she was in a much better state of mind. And I decided I was going to read it again because I was like, she probably didn't understand it, like
Right.
listen to it at all. And it was a completely different second experience, you know. But I was just I wasn't trying to make any point. I was just like, you know, because as I was reading it, I was able to see the meaning of it, and I was like, she really needs to hear this chapter. And last night she didn't hear it, even though she was engaging with it some. And now that she's in a better spot, we'll read it again. And it was brand new for her. I mean, but it was. I didn't sit there and moralize to her. I was like, you just need to hear this story.
It is interesting. They, excuse me, they love the stories that are meaningful. They want to do over and over and over again. Princess and the Goblin is a favorite in our family, and you know they just continually pick it up, or they'll listen to the audio, or it's just you know sort of in the background. They love the repetition of those stories, and the good ones are so meaningful many times over. But that's interesting to not comment. That's
By and large, no, shouldn't comment. I mean, on occasion, yes, we might make comparisons, perhaps, between stories and characters that they are already acquainted with, yeah. But if we listen carefully enough, there will be questions they ask that can lead into a discussion which is beyond their imagination and intellect at that moment, but which they can learn.
And I recall Cheryl Swope talking about Cheryl Swope, who developed our Simply Classical curriculum for special needs students, that she would, when the child would be struggling with something in their daily life, she could then reference back to the fairy story or you know, or some piece of fiction that they'd read and talked about of like, remember how that, you know, in that story, this is what happens. Well, that's going to be a natural consequence, or, you know, this is why we don't do that. And it gives them, like you mentioned at the very beginning, right? It's the most concrete of stories. They can actually understand that better when you then say, well, you need to be obedient because like so-and-so. I think that really kind of hammers it home. So for people that maybe didn't grow up with fairy stories or never as adults actually went back to them to say, okay, what does this fairy tale story really mean? How does an adult get to the sort of philosophical depth that might be in a story?
Well, fairy tales weren't written for children in particular, although MacDonald knew that the audience of his fantasies would involve children, but he would have been the first to say that they're not limited to children, these stories I've written. And as far as the stories that the Grimms tell and write and tell, they're not intended for children in particular at all. I mean, fairy tales have a lineage, I think, where the entire community would be entertained by fairy tales, not just children. So they're not limited to children. And what was the gist of the question?
So
again?
how does somebody get to the philosophical depth that's there? And maybe your response would be it's innate to our human nature to be able to kind of figure that out, right? Because we are beings that understand sign and symbol,
right?
But I would suggest to somebody, you probably can't suggest this, but I would suggest that you listen to one or two lectures that Vegan has done for us, like the college days that we've had at the conference, where you went over Snow White one year, I know, where you went through the text and kind of pointed things out. I can't remember. I think you did at least a couple of those.
Yes. I might have done Cinderella too. I can't remember.
But seeing those, and we should have those recorded, but just sitting and watching one or two of those, then you kind of get the gist of what's going on.
Well, I'll tell you something. There's something magical that does happen when you read or tell a fairy tale to a child. And that is that the adult learns more about what the meaning is in those stories by reading to a child, even if the child is not terribly responsive. There's a conversation going on there. I found that when I was reading to my children and now my grandchildren, that I come to a better understanding of those stories by reading them to someone else, but namely a child.
I have a question for you that I think would help parents like myself. What age do you recommend fairy tales for children? What age do you recommend introducing children to fairy tales, and which fairy tales?
Well, I think a 5-year-old is probably, that's the age you start reading fairy tales. The hesitancy of modern people is that there's violence even in some of these fairy tales. Chesterton had a good answer for that, but there's violence in the world. They already know it, one way or another. They know it. The gift of the fairy tale to the child is that the fairy tale, in the end, assures the child that violence, that evil, has a limit, and that there's an answer to it, particularly in a character that occurs in the story, that assures them that violence or evil is answered to, even when inside the world. So I think that fairy tales, people say that fairy tales will frighten a child. Well, children need to be frightened in some sense, or they're already frightened. Mm-hmm. Somehow, as Chesterton said, the boogeyman is already in the world. So, or bogey, or however you want to pronounce it. So they're not introduced to something so new as we might imagine. Already in the child, there is this this acquaintance with things that are threatening to the child and draw out fear. And actually, fairy tales, in the end, assure them that the world is not going to be overwhelmed by this evil that they are afraid of. And it doesn't matter. Well, in Snow White, if you want to get to a deeper thing, so children, so the Grimm's Snow White, if the entire story is there and has not been bowdlerized, there's blood in that story. The two stepsisters actually cut off part of their feet, toes or whatever, heel, in order to be able to fit their foot into the slipper that the prince has captured and has brought to find the young maiden that he was dancing with. The stepmother advises these two stepsisters, who are her daughters, to do one thing or another: cut off your toe or cut off your heel. And the shoe, unlike in Perrault's story, is not glass; it's gold. Well, you can't see blood through that shoe, but it seeps out while he's riding off with them as his potential bride, and so there's blood there. But really, in the depths of it, this is sacrilege, because blood has a sacral meaning to it, and the shedding of blood in this instance is not sacrifice. Is not in the context of the kind of sacrifice that blood appears in many religions, including Christianity. So there is a depth there that probably the child won't apprehend at first. Probably most adults won't at first, but it's not gratuitous. It leads to a good ending, in point of fact. That is to say that the real daughter of the real what do I want to say? Snow White is the pure one. In her name itself indicates that, and there is no bloodshed when he finally identifies Snow White as the one who had been at the dances to which she had attended.
Well, and now I may have my fairy tales mixed up, but you're talking about Cinderella, right?
No.
With the slipper?
No. Oh, excuse me, Cinderella. I'm talking about Cinderella. I got my head mixed up there. Yes, Cinderella.
Now, that's actually fascinating with the idea of them cutting off their toes or heel, but thinking it's hidden, right, with the gold slipper instead of a glass one. Because that's what children do that all the time, right? Like they'll do something like, I think if it's hidden, nobody will know. Right?
So they know that these two stepsisters are practicing a deception, which makes the point that they're not worthy of the son of the king. And you got to remember, the Grimms used the German word literally translated as son of the king. They didn't use Prinz, which is another German word that can be applied to prince. They use the term Königssohn, the son of the king. Well, where does that reference you ultimately, but to the Father in heaven? See? So,
but for to kind of follow up on, I mean, Lee, I asked a couple of different questions, but as far as what fairy tales to read to your children, you've got the original ones coming mostly out of that from our tradition, mostly out of Europe. You've got the Americanized versions of them. You've got the Disneyfied versions of them. Where do we go?
Well, you all know that I am terribly dissatisfied with picture book versions of these classic tales, because almost inevitably, with the few exceptions, very few exceptions, they've been Baudelarized, they've been retold, they've been shortened for whatever reasons. They appear that way, so that don't trust picture book versions of most of the great fairy tales. So what you do, you go to scholars who have collected the fairy tales and translate them for us. Where they are practicing their profession, which is that oftentimes they're German scholars of German, and they have a responsibility to translate in a way which is near to what might have been the Grimm's meaning. And that means you don't cut things out and you stay close to the meaning of the German words themselves. Maybe not the word order, the rephrase, things like that. Verb tenses may change, but basically, these are truthful translations. So you have to find those. And I pointed out to people where you can find them. But then the problem is there are no pictures. So what you do is you get a picture book version of a good one of the Grimm's tales, and you use that to show pictures and read from the legitimate text. It's a sorry state of affairs, mind you, but it's not a new state of affairs. I've mentioned many times, Dickens just was outraged by the retelling of these stories in his own time, which followed a particular ideology, which was temperance of all things. Every age has its ideologies, and these ideologies narrow the scope of meaning and twist it sometimes. And he was objecting to this in the publishing industry in the 1850s. So this is not new. It's only become more present to us because of our affluence and availability of books.
Mm-hmm. And to combat that, I don't know if I should say this on the air, but you're here working on some pictures and translations of fairy tales, right?
Presumably.
That's what we're at. So don't hold us to that. It may take a while, but we're trying to do our part.
There are two authorial voices in picture books. That can present a problem, or it can be an opportunity for greater depth and richness. Mm-hmm. So yes, but there needs to be greater cooperation and communication between the translator and the artist. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're trying to work at here. So the depiction, the pictures actually reflect the story. It doesn't matter so much that the artist interprets the story in his or her own way, but accurately depicts the action and the characters in the drawings themselves.
All right. Well, to conclude, I have a question for all of you all. What's your favorite fairy tale and why? Don't be bashful. I'll start. Fine. Okay. The most recent one I read it's the one I can remember because I have not been a good adult and read my fairy tales. But Pinocchio, I very much enjoyed. Episodic, lot, and it's going back and reading it. I'm like, oh, no wonder this is such a good thing for a child to read because there's so many good, vivid stories and lessons
inside of the novel itself. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I just mentioned Princess and the Goblin is an all-time favorite in our family. I also really loved The Nightingale, particularly the translation that you did in our fairy tales class recently. So
I'm going to have to go with a non-answer because this is where I'm lacking. I mean, I read things like Narnia to my children, but I'd like to do more and read more with them.
So the next time I see Hannah, I'm going to ask what fairy story her dad has read to her recently.
That's right. And I've read George MacDonald, I've read Fantasties and some others, but it's been so long. I need to go back.
You've read Fantasties.
Yeah.
Do you understand it?
No.
Neither do I.
Yeah.
You need to let it wash over you like a wave in the ocean.
Yeah.
You
don't read it once.
No. And you take your time.
What's your answer to that question?
But it's not fair because I've read so many of them.
Yeah.
That's true.
Well, I would divide them up into two categories. There are the shorter fairy tales, and then there are the longer novel-length children's stories, of which many of them have a fairy tale character. Mm-hmm. So yes, Pinocchio is the greatest of the novel-length fairy tales in my view, even as much as I love The Princess and the Goblin. Somehow or other, it connects with children in a way that very few stories do. If you're reading it to a child, you should bear up and allow the child to enjoy it and not not show a face that is boredom or why am I reading this to my child on your face? Because the child hooks into it in ways that is brilliant. So it is a great fairy tale. Yeah, but that doesn't mean to say that there are other longer fairy tales that I'm attracted to. One of them is The Princess and the Goblin, but clearly there are others. Now, one story that is almost postmodern in its character is I'm going blank now. Peter Pan. Now, Peter Pan is crazy. Whether you read the play or the novel, I'd say go to the novel first, but not necessarily. But what's going on in that? I mean, a child is probably going to get something else out of it than an adult, because the authorial voice addresses the children on the one hand, and then addresses the adult on the other hand. But this is a masterpiece. It's absolutely brilliant. James Barrie was Sird, became a knight because of that story. And there is a reason for it. It's brilliant, it's crazy, it's outrageous. And what is he doing? What's happening here? But somehow or other, he draws you into it in a way that few longer fairy tale stories are able to do. Yeah.
Well, there's a few for you all to go read, and for you to read to your children, Ian. And with that, we will conclude. So come join us next time, and who knows who you're going to find at the table.
Thanks for joining us today on Classical Etc. by Memoria Press. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, or share this episode or comment. We love to hear your questions and your comments. If you want to learn more about Memoria Press, please go to memoriapress.com. This has been Classical Etc. We're so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.